Hello there, welcome to the video. Sarah here to talk to you today about EQing piano. Those regular to the channel will know that I've been doing a little series on how to EQ and more basically not necessarily how to EQ but more about how to hear EQ and how to make decisions around what to cut and what to boost. So I've got a little series that I've done earlier on in the channel where I cover some techniques on how to do that, to just make these EQ decisions that can sometimes trip you up. So today, after a few requests actually, the next one in the series is about piano. So the piano's kind of tricky because it is so full fat. The lowest notes on the piano to the highest notes of the piano basically covers the full frequency spectrum of any instrument and voice on the planet, I think. So it takes some EQ wrangling to get it to fit inside busy mixers. So the decisions around what frequency to cut or boost depends on the instrumentation of your track, the style of music as well, because piano features in a whole wealth of musical styles. And if you were to sit down and do some homework and listen to those different musical styles and pianos within them, you would identify that tonally they do sound quite different between each one. For example, you would associate a very forward-sounding, bright piano with a pop track. You would expect a piano in a more traditional type of music, like a jazz style or some sort of easy listening style of music, would be more natural sound and naturalistic sound and not hyped in any way. Smooth top end, full bass end, particularly if that piano is the main instrument other than a voice, for example. And then you've got other styles of music, rock and pop and indie rock, where the piano might be more mid-focused, not have so many of those shimmery tops to them, not have much in the way of lows and low mids even, and it's all kind of around the mid-range where you want to focus to make sure the piano's heard without having to push the fader higher and higher, but also where it's not encroaching in on the guitars and that the guitars and the piano are working together in a rounded way to fill out the picture, yet both be defined and separate. So the style of music you work with is going to guide you in how you're going to EQ your piano. With chill out music, where in the electronic field, where you've got that sort of modern classical and you've got instrumental pieces where it's all very kind of slow and laid back and less dense often in terms of instrumentation, then you're going to EQ that piano to sound much more, again, not so many highs. In actual fact, you may think it sounds quite dull, but that's the style of piano, that sound of piano fits with that style of music. So being aware of that and being aware of the tonality you want to bring to your piano is the decision you need to make right at the start before you even start twisting knobs. So when thinking about piano, thinking about EQing piano, we need to think about certain areas of the frequency spectrum like we've done in previous videos. So we're going to think about the lows, the very low sub frequencies. We're going to think about the low mids, the all important low mids where everything seems to gather up and layer on top of each other and create masking and muddiness. Then you've got your mid frequencies, you've got your lower mids, your upper mids, and then you've got your highs. Because I tend to work in rock music and all various subgenres within rock music, I tend to approach piano the same way as I approach guitars. And that is thinking about those low frequencies, very low frequencies, the sub frequencies. I'm going to roll some of those off because I need to make room for the bass guitar and the drums. And then I'm going to look at the lower mids, I'm going to cut a little bit out in the lower mids to make sure that the guitars and the piano will sit together and jointly fill in that low mid sound without it getting muddy. And then I'm going to go to the mid frequencies. But what I'm more importantly or notably going to do here with piano is I'm going to choose some different frequencies to the mid frequencies that I may have boosted on the guitars, so that we create a focal point of difference between the guitars and the piano. For the guitars, for example, I tend to go to about 1.4, 1.5 or 2.8 kilohertz to boost, to pull the guitars out of the mix and to give the ear something to latch onto. With piano, I'm going to move a little bit either side of that. Of course, the caveat here is it depends on the piano sound that you're working with, because some piano sounds may have focused mid frequencies built into them anyway. So you've got to kind of feel your way through. But the point I want to get across here, if you are going to boost in the mid frequencies, choose something that's different to what you've chosen for the guitars. Let's take a look at this piano that I've got for you here. Okay, I just wanted to play that extended for you because I wanted you to think about what that piano is doing. What's the sound? What does it sound like already before we even do anything to it? And so the first thing of note is the way that it's being played. It's very kind of a staccato pattern, rhythmic pattern that it's following. But not only that is its tone already before we've even applied any EQ. It's all quite upper register anyway, isn't it? So there could be an element of lows there, low mids that we don't really need. It's that kind of mid-rangey sound anyway. So we might as well do a bit of a low cut and a low mid cut just to remove any stray frequencies that happen to be down there to keep our headroom intact in the mix. But what I actually wanted to do in this video is, rather than working in solo, because I could tell you now, if I just go in here now and start adding a low cut filter and taking out some low mids, you're not really going to hear much. And what's so important is how this piano is interacting with the other instruments in the mix, because it's not a main piano, it's not a featured piano, it's actually a supporting piano. But I want it to be heard. I don't want it to be lost in amongst the rest of the instrumentation. So what I want to do is actually EQ this piano in the context of its closest neighbours. So rather than a full mix here for you, we're going to get pretty close to a full mix, but rather than having drums, bass, guitars and vocals all coming at you, and you trying to pick out what I'm doing with a solitary piano, I'm just going to narrow it down a little bit for you. And this is something that I do often, and that is, it allows me to maintain the context without having to get to grips with every single track in the mix, the full mix. And I find it still works for me by doing that, in that it still works in the entire mix. So in this mix, I've got drums, bass, guitars, other keyboards, piano. It obviously includes the piano, but there are other synths happening as well, and then vocals. Well, I'm going to mute the vocals here, solo up the guitars and the bass, because those instruments are what the piano is having to marry up with. Let's take a listen to that then now. Okay, again, I'll let that play so that you could get your ears around it. What I noticed there is that there's a kind of a dullness around the piano. Certain notes of the piano are getting lost, and it's starting to just feel a little bit lackluster, a little bit recessed, and I think we can help that out. We can make that piano feel a bit more present in the mix as a supporting piano. So I've opened up the SSL 9000J plugin here that I quite like on keyboards and synths as, again, point of difference. If you refer to the other videos that I've done in this series, I'm using different channel strips. And the reason I'm using channel strips, if you haven't seen those other videos, is it just makes decision making around EQing so much simpler, because it takes away the overwhelm of looking at a digital EQ interface and having the option of placing as many EQ points as you would ever care to do. So in order to make things simple, I think a channel strip just really helps there, and it prevents you over processing as well. As we heard the piano in solo earlier on, there's not a lot of lows in this piano tone, so I'm just going to go straight in and apply a high pass filter. What I'm wanting to do here is just to keep a handle on the very low frequencies across the entire mix so that my mix bus compressor isn't going to be overworked. Let's just do that. What I will do actually before I do that, I'm going to actually just give this piano a little bit of a push on the fader to help you hear it, or at least hear the changes that I'm going to make with the EQ. Okay. Right, let's get rid of some of these lows that we don't need. And the technique here is to go too far with the frequencies. So you go too far so you can really hear that the piano's gone really thin, and then bring it back. And then you're kind of just rocking in to find the right place for where you want to settle. You don't want to cut, you don't want it to be too insipid and thin sounding. You do want to keep some of the body there. So let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to go too far, then I'm going to come back, and then I'm just going to find the right spot. All right. The next stage is to switch this in and out to see if you can actually hear a difference. Switch this low cut in and out, okay. And you know what? I can't, and that's absolutely fine, because what we've done is we've settled at 195 hertz there, and that cut hasn't affected the tonality of the piano at all, but it's actually taken some content away there in that 195 and below to make space for the bass guitar. In actual fact, what is could be fun to try out, and is a great technique actually, is to listen to the instrument that you're actually trying to create space for, rather than the instrument that you've EQ'd. Okay, so let's do that again, but let's listen to the bass guitar and see if we can hear any difference to the bass guitar. And if we don't, we don't. But I think it'd be an interesting experiment. Okay, listening to the bass there really carefully, it's very, very subtle difference. But when you take the high pass filter out, the bass guitar sounds just a little bit fuller, a little bit woollier. And with the high pass filter in, the bass just tightens up a tiny bit. That phenomena can, where you listen to the opposing instrument that you're trying to create the space for by EQing the other instrument, is that's a great approach to take and can work more obviously in other examples. So I just want to pass that on to you. So that's the low cut filter done. Let's look at the low mids now. So sticking with our channel strip, let's go to the low mid frequencies on the SSL. It's these blue pots here. And let's look in this kind of 300, 400 hertz area to see if we can pull something out there. In guitar, I tend to pull out about 200 hertz, 220, something like that, to 180. It really depends. But it's a similar kind of idea here. I'm going to look more around the 300 hertz area initially, see if we can find a muddiness that we can pull out and bring some clarity to the guitar, to the piano. What I'll do though is, we're still listening to context of the guitars and bass. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to really boost the 300 hertz area here so that you can locate that. And then I'm just going to move that around up to about 400, maybe a little bit under the 300 to decide what frequency doesn't sound particularly nice and cut it. So I've just stuck with 300 hertz basically. Didn't like that, so I'm going to pull a bit of that out. What I want you to take away from this video as well is, again, if you haven't watched the previous videos, is giving your ear a chance to identify what it is you're actually listening to by giving your ear the before so that you can create the after, okay? So rather than just going straight, pressing play and going straight in with the boost, I want to hear what that piano sounds like in that frequency area before I start boosting and cutting. It just gives you a starting point, and it's kind of how you know how much to cut and boost as well. Let's get this little low mid cut in place. So just notice there how muddy or woolly the piano, thick the piano sounds, and then I'm going to start and pull. You see, you've got to acknowledge that before you can start cutting. Do you understand? You've got to hear that to know when to stop with the cut. All right. All right, so I took it too far again. I started to really hear it and it started to get too thin at around about -6. So I started to rock it back again and decided to split the difference more or less and go to about -3.5. So in the next kind of stage of deciding the amount of cut, I'm going to bypass this EQ section and then bring it in and see if it's having the desired effect. yes, I'm happy with that. I've taken away that woolliness. I feel that is kind of built into that piano sound. Don't overthink this. It could be 295 hertz. It could be 300 hertz. It could be 305 hertz. It really, I guarantee you, if I were to go through that now, that same process with those 3 frequencies, you would get the same result. So don't overthink it. That is the frequency, the actual exact perfect frequency to cut. Okay, just go with your gut. All right. Next, we're moving on to our boost. So we've done those 2 cuts, those cleanups, those corrective EQ moves, being the low cut filter and then the low mid cut. Now, I want to do a little bit of enhancement. So how can we get this piano to just peep its nose over those guitars? So we're going to do an upper mid boost to achieve that. This style of music doesn't really warrant a bright, shiny, shimmery piano sound. This is more that style of music where it's more kind of mid-focused, and the original tone of the piano has given us that clue anyway from the band. At the top of the video, I talked about choosing a different upper mid frequency to boost on the piano versus the guitars or versus any other complementary instrumentation that you're using. Could be strings. Choose a different upper mid frequency to push to build in that feeling of separation in between the instrumentation groups. So on guitars, I tend to boost 1.4, 1.5 and 2.8. Depends on the guitar, could be a little bit higher. Sometimes you have to go to 3.5 or even 4 if it's particularly dull. With this piano, let's try at 4K, I think is where I kind of want to go. 4K on guitars tends to be quite harsh sounding. 3.5K, 4K on guitars. Therefore, on piano, let's see what a boost there sounds like. Because so then you're filling in that hole. So then in your instrumentation, you're going to have a nice kind of bump on your guitars at about 2.8, 3K maybe, 3K down to 1.5. It's going to be a nice hump there. So a little bit above that at 4K would make sense to enhance the piano. Let's see what that sounds like. The other take is to go below that. It would be to try and boost it around about 1K. Okay, 1K. So either side of the enhancing boost that you've built into the guitars. And I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to listen for a bar and then I'm going to actually make the move. Certainly brought the piano into more focus. You can hear it now. It's separated from the guitars. You're hearing it more because it's a staccato part. It's adding or it's bringing forward the transient nature of the part. You've got to be careful not to go too far with this. Because then what it's going to start to do, because don't forget, even though I'm not playing them here, you've got vocals. So let's do a quick bypass test here with the EQ. I'm going to switch the whole EQ out. The filter will remain, but the low mid cut and the high mid boost will be bypassed. So I'll start with it out and then I'll bring it in. So that's what this piano sounds like when we start boosting above the enhancement frequency of the guitars. What's it sound like if we go below? So we're going to really change the tone of this piano now. Rather than it sounding quite sort of plinky, tinny almost, we're going to move this round now and we're going to explore between kind of 1 and 2K. Got to be really careful in this area because that is, for one, it's where our ears are most sensitive. So you're going to be able to hear it, naturally going to be able to hear it more. But it can also give you a really quite tight, focused telephonic sound. So I'm going to get rid of, let's zero out this 4K boost. So we start with a flat frequency for the high mids. And actually I am going to go back, I will add that sort of boost there. Let's give it a 3 dB boost and take in what this piano sounds like now in the bass and the guitars. So what if we start to explore down here then at 1K? Quite different, much smoother, not as forward as the guitars, and in actual fact it feels easier to listen to, and what it's doing is it's shifting the focus over back to the guitars. In the layering of the instrumentation, the piano is going to sit just slightly under, in terms of grabbing the attention or the focus from the listener, the piano is just slightly under the guitars. Now for this song, for this mix, I actually prefer that tone to the brighter attention-grabbing tone of between 3 and 4.5, 3 and 5K, really, you could choose. But that upper range there might actually work really well in a pop tune. So can you see how varied a tonal change you can create by EQ and piano? I actually felt as though this could be quite a difficult video to make, actually, because there are so many variables. So I hope at least this is kind of highlighting the direction you can take piano, and there are so many different ones. But in doing so, think the main drivers for that shift in feel and in dynamic is this high mid frequency choice that you can make. So going from more the middly sound between, using a boost between 1 and 2K, being careful. And then, again, still being careful, going for a higher boost. And the idea is that boost is either side of any other supporting instrument that you're having to fit in with the mix. Now, if you didn't have guitars, if this were a mix of fewer parts, if it were drums, bass, piano, vocal, then it would be a slightly different approach again. You've got more room for the piano for a start off, and you could end up deciding to use more of use the high frequency shelf as well to lift the sound of the piano and to go for that more naturalistic sound. So that's another thing to consider depending on the instrumentation and the genre of the music. One last time with this particular track, I'm going to bypass the EQ and then I'm going to bring it in. If you like this mix, or like this song, I've used it quite a bit on the channel, but it is part of my rock mixing masterclass where I mixed this track from start to finish, and you get to see all of my mixing decisions as they come to me in the moment in over 11 hours of video footage. So that if you like the sound of that and want to explore that with me, then there'll be a link to it in the description. What we haven't spoken about yet is how in the more relaxed, chill out styles of music, like neoclassical music or certain electronic styles of music, where they tend to be instrumental, the piano sounds are quite dull and quite lo-fi sounding. And that is an approach you could certainly take, and you certainly do here in indie music as well, and certainly in indie rock styles of music. And in order to get that effect, you are using a low pass filter, and you might be coming down, you're taking some high frequencies off to get that dullness. That dullness will give an entirely different feel to the piano. It will sound warm, thick, it will sound calming. That's why it ends up being in so many chill out music tracks, because of that calming nature that you can create by rolling off all the high frequencies, and you can come down to as much as 5 kilohertz with that, 5 or 4.5 kilohertz, depending on the original track, of course, to get that rounded, fat, warm, dull piano sound. An example of that for you would be a mix that I did here for the artist BPMoore, who is a neoclassical producer, musician, songwriter. The song is called All That You Can Be. This one has got vocals, there's some drums in there, we've got synths, and we have strings. And so let's give you an idea of what a typical lo-fi piano sound might be and how enveloping it is and relaxing it is to hear.
You're going to bleed out stars and burst in flames of ecstasy. Sometimes you will cry.
Okay, so you can really hear how rolled off that piano sound is. It's built into the sound there, into it are the noises, the mechanics of the piano, which is that kind of scratchy noise you can hear. That's all part of the fun of the style of neoclassical music. Let's have a look what I've done here. I've got the Pro Q3 that I've used, and you can see that, you know, what we talked about earlier. I've done a low cut at 100 hertz, and I've done a low mid cut at 400 on this piano, just to take away some of that thickness. And that sounds like this. If we look at that piano part on the spectrum analyzer, out of interest, you can see that the actual built-in tone that the producer has chosen has not got much above 3K in it anyway. So if you were dealing with a full sounding piano and you were wanting to make it fit into this sound signature for this style of music, that's what I was referring to earlier, is where you may need to use a high cut filter to get rid of those sparkly highs. Feels wrong, doesn't it? But that's what this style of music needs, and it sounds great, and it just changes the feel and the mood of the piece. Again, what I'm doing, using a separate EQ, is boosting 1.2K. This style of music, it's very kind of rolled off the top. The low end can be rolled off as well, and then you're giving it a bit of a bump at 1K, and that type of EQ filter is called a band pass filter, and that's very, very typical. And that's sometimes what you've got to do to be able to get pianos loud enough without the low end kind of getting out of control when you're dealing with full sounding instruments like we've got here with strings and bass and drums and vocals. So that's an example of how I've used that sort of middly sounding piano in a different style of music completely to rock. So the key is right from the outset knowing what kind of mood, vibe, tonality you are trying to create with the piano. The second thing is to use a channel strip, because that takes away the paradox of choice and gets you closer to your desired piano sound faster. And the third thing is to consider the other instrumentation in the mix. It plays such an important part in the decision-making process of where you're going to go tonally with the piano. How are you going to use EQ to complement the other instruments in the mix so that the two work together? Be it guitars, piano, synths, piano, strings, piano, vocals, piano. Okay. If you're interested in any of the bands or any of the music that I've featured in today's video, the links for those will be in the description. If you like the way I talk about music production and mixing music, then please subscribe. There's more of this to come. But apart from that, if you just like the video, give us a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next video.